Okay, hello everybody. Um, Thank you to everybody for attending today, and I would officially like to welcome everybody to the fourth and final part of the Accelerating the Implementation of Renewable Energy Project National Webinar Series. My name is Eric Timmons. I'm a senior lead at Quest and the project lead for this project. And before we get going today, I just want to let you know, hopefully all of you are familiar with Zoom. If there are any questions throughout the presentation today, there is a Q&A box that is available to you, as well as feel free to drop questions in the chat as well. We will be monitoring throughout. We will also have an allotted time for questions towards the end of the session today. So the project, the Accelerating the Implementation of Renewable Energy, or AIRE project, this is a project that Quest has undertaken in partnership with the University of Guelph and the Community Energy Knowledge Action Partnership. And of course, we are presented through our great funding partner, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. So this project has focused on changing policies, changing regulations, plans, and behaviors in order to enable reductions in municipal emissions. And this has involved mobilizing the adoption of proven technologies and processes, and as well as practices, along with applying new ones considered innovative to the local context. And this all has the overall goal of assisting implementation of renewable energy in the participating municipalities. So our webinar today is a key piece to that process, and we will be presenting the overall results of this project and presenting our protocol as a guide to municipalities. So this will showcase a series of resources that we have compiled into what we've nicknamed a protocol that can increase capacity among municipalities to accelerate renewable energy implementation. Municipal councils have been setting ambitious climate change mitigation targets in which local renewable energy development figures quite prominently. And to date, municipalities have played a relatively small role in energy supply planning and implementation, and as a result, can have little experience or resources upon which they can draw on to move toward implementation. So the protocol that has been developed is designed to help fill this capacity by bringing together information and best practices from across Canada, combined with novel concepts and techniques in spatial planning and community engagement. So this protocol has been developed over the course of the two-year AIRE project. And for the presentation today, I would like to welcome in a very key part of this project, Kirby Calvert from the University of Guelph. Kirby is an associate professor there where he leads the Community Energy Knowledge Action Partnership, is also the co-founder and chair of the board of directors of Our Energy Guelph, which is a community not-for-profit working under a service agreement with the city of Guelph to implement community energy initiatives. And if you attended part 3 of our webinar series, you would have got a very intimate look at that organization. So without further ado, I would like to pass it over to Kirby.
Thank you, Eric. Hello, everyone. It's great to be with you all again. As Eric mentioned, the purpose of the presentation is to provide sort of a high-level overview of the protocol that we've put together. And we've stuck with this language of protocol because that's what we called it 2 years ago when we originally wrote the grant and came up with the idea. But one of the things I'd like to flag is that protocol might not, we've recognized that protocol isn't exactly the right language. This is much more of a guidebook or a wayfinder or a compass. So I just wanted to start with that to get us all situated and to sort of set expectations, because often when we say protocol or we think of a protocol, we think of quite a sort of a rigid sequence of actions that need to be taken in order to achieve a certain objective. And of course, we know that that's not always the case. The conditions for success in anything, but especially in implementing renewable energy at the local level, are very situational, very circumstantial. And so what we are trying to do is in some ways provide a recipe rather than the specific ingredients. So I'm talking in a lot of metaphors here to get us thinking about to encourage us to think a very particular way about this protocol and about the resources that we'll be discussing today. But before I get too far, I just wanted to start with the credits. As always, behind any presentation, there's a team that supported the content that went into it, and the names that you're seeing on the right there are folks that have played a really crucial role in bringing all of this together over the last couple of years. So the resources that we've put together into the protocol have been developed and organized in response to this question: what can municipalities do to accelerate the implementation of renewable energy? So it's a question that I think a lot of us have been asking, whether we're working with and in municipalities or through municipalities. And before I go further, I just feel compelled to make a caveat, and that is that we recognize that this does not all fall on municipalities. We recognize the wide range of limitations that often limit the sphere of control that municipalities have in trying to accelerate implementation of renewable energy. There's, of course, markets at play, market forces at play. There are provincial policies at play. But at the same time, we also recognize that there is plenty a municipality can do within its sphere of influence to position its community for success and to support renewable energy development as an economic development initiative and also as a climate change mitigation initiative. So what we want to do is provide resources that are consistent with what municipalities can do. And some of what we'll talk about are actions that municipalities can take to move the needle tomorrow or immediately. Others that we'll discuss are about proactive structural change that can anticipate some of the larger shifts in markets and provincial policies. In other words, the changes that position a municipality for success in the long term. Okay, so this is the sort of guiding question for the resources that we've put together, and our answer comes in 5 parts. We've organized the content and the resources into 5 sections, each of which is written out here as sort of an action item or something that is actionable. And as mentioned right off the top here, these are not meant to be prescriptive, and they're not meant to be treated as some sort of linear process at the end of which we've accelerated implementation. These are, again, more like a compass or more like a recipe in which you'll need to find your own ingredients. We'll provide some resources for you to do that. So in bold there, I'll speak slowly, give you a chance to sort of let this all settle in, but of course I'll walk through each of these. In bold are the sort of the key action items that we'll walk through. I'll come back to this, so if you don't capture it all, that's fine. I think the key point that I'd like to make before moving forward is that, as I mentioned, these are not linear or sequential. And so this is how we've decided to represent these action items as a collection of structural components, in other words, gears that need to be spinning, as well as key inputs, those yellow arrows that you see, resource assessments and community and stakeholder engagement. We feel that these are all within the sphere of municipal control. And so this isn't the full picture of what is required in order to accelerate implementation, but it is the picture from the municipal lens. I'll just flip to the website really quickly, because what I'm going to show you right now is eventually going to be embedded into a website, and you'll be able to sort of link and find your way to the resources that I'll share through this sort of dynamic graphic. So that's how it's all going to be made available to you sometime very early in the new year. But as I'll mention, if you want these resources sooner than later, as always, feel free to reach out. So what we've done is, by creating this graphic and hyperlinking it, is provide an entry point into these resources that can meet you where you're at. So as I said, it's not linear or sequential. We want to provide resources and support whatever action item you feel is a priority in your community. And so for the purpose of this presentation, just for the the sake of creating a bit of a story arc that helps us tie together all of these resources, I'm going to start with municipal support. So I'll start with the little red gear, and we'll move from there. And the idea here is to provide a high-level overview of the resources that will be made available to you in each facet, and to discuss the significance of those resources and how those resources can be used. So I'm going to try as hard as possible not to get into the weeds on this too much, but rather to show you how to access these resources and how these resources might be leveraged. There's likely going to be some redundancy with previous webinars, and so I do apologize for that, but hopefully I can keep that to a minimum. So as mentioned, let's start with the resources that are available under this action item that we've highlighted as developing comprehensive municipal supports. And the reason that we've highlighted this action item is because when we think about the municipal role in accelerating implementation of renewable energy, we often think about municipalities acting in consistently with these sort of first two categories, either as an implementer or as an investor. And that is certainly a crucial role. We'll talk about that very briefly in a minute, but we also wanted to provide resources that could support municipalities in their role as facilitators of implementation. And they facilitate implementation, especially through regulatory changes, as well as sort of soft power market signals that build capacity out into the community. And so we wanted to make sure that we put this language in front of municipalities so that we could start to think about how a comprehensive approach might be operationalized, how we could facilitate implementation of renewable energy development without always thinking of the municipality as putting money on the table and or directly implementing those technologies themselves. Although again, as I mentioned, that is still a very critical role in all of this. It's not the full picture. And so what we've done here, and what we're continuing to do as we search for case studies, is identify a bit like a menu of options for practitioners that can help you articulate the role that your municipality can play relative to some targets or ongoing programs that you set, as well as some detailed information about those roles that can be used to make a compelling case to your executives and to councillors and to design your own programs. So these resources are really entry points into preparing staff and preparing municipalities to take on these multiple roles. And so again, this is going to be embedded into a website, but I'll just show you some of the back end of what we're putting together here. So we've got each of the categories will be listed and made available. And we've got case studies that we feel, of course, we can't capture everything and all of the great things that municipalities are doing, but what we've tried to capture are some of the really innovative bits, some of the initiatives that municipalities have taken that are innovative. So think of this as a bit of a warehouse in which we're storing all of this to try to accelerate the policy diffusion process. I'll come back to Markham District Energy in a minute. What I wanted to do is use this, the downtown district heating system in Prince George, BC, as an example of what these resources provide and how to use them. So within each of those roles, I'll just step back really quickly to remind us. So we've got these sort of case studies written out, multiple case studies for each of these 4 categories that you're seeing here. And we are providing a synopsis or a summary of a particular initiative that we feel is innovative. And importantly, we're also providing links to key resources that can be used. So in this case, Prince George, the city of Prince George implemented district energy directly, and it entered into a 10-year supply agreement with Lakeland Mills Limited for 5 megawatts thermal energy in the form of hot water that is generated by burning residues from the mill. And what we've done is we've provided a link to that supply agreement. And so this will help you if this is something that makes sense for your municipality, particularly those forestry communities, single industry forestry communities in particular. You now have a set of resources that can you have an idea, and also a set of resources that can help you operationalize that idea and communicate that idea, and move it forward by showing that it has been successful in a different context. Okay, so we've got that under each of the 4 categories, different case studies, and links to sort of core components of those programs. So again, I don't want to get into the weeds on each of these and discuss the relative merits of each of them, just to show you what these resources are and how they can be used. Again, we tried to do the best we could to link to the specific standards, the specific bylaw changes, specific policies and plans to help put as much information in your hands as possible. Okay, so that's the first set of resources, helping to provide a set of actions, case studies that lead to a set of actions that allow you to take a comprehensive approach to accelerating implementation of renewable energy. One of the categories under encourage that I'd like to highlight, because it leads to our next action item, is innovative ways to encourage and to lead, in particular, lead awareness and education campaigns. And this leads to one of our other action items, and you've heard me talk about this before if you've been on a webinar. So again, I won't go into too much detail, but conducting resource assessments to identify and communicate opportunities for renewable energy development. It's really critical as you're thinking about the role that you want to play, and as you're thinking about what the municipality can do to take stock of the opportunities available. So it's got that really important analytical function to help you develop effective policy. It also has a very important facilitation function in that it provides a focal point. These resource maps and resource assessments provide a focal point for dialogue with the community and with implementation partners. We'll talk about in a minute. We always discuss renewable energy resources in the context of this inverted triangle. It is akin and has been developed in ways that are consistent with how the oil and gas industry has assessed its resource base for decades. In other words, it distinguishes theoretical resource, solar irradiance or wind speed, from what is very likely to be accessible after accounting for technical constraints, any legal or regulatory constraints, any economic constraints, and any social or political constraints related to public opposition. So we've developed a framework through which we can make those distinctions and get a much better understanding of the realizable potential within our communities. So we've implemented this framework in many of our participating communities. So here I'm just showing a map of solar resources in Canmore, right? So again, we're taking, this process takes you from that theoretical understanding of what solar irradiance looks like and how it compares to other global markets, into a map that distinguishes those areas that are most likely to be economically viable under a set of constraints. So this is wind resources in Moncton, right? So right off the bat, we're able to see those areas that have relatively higher wind speeds from a theoretical potential, and we are able to overlay on top of that information about the areas that are likely to be developed under existing regulatory and economic constraints. And here's biomass resources. So what we're showing you is relative to the region of York, within a 150-kilometer driving distance of the region of York, the spatial density or the center of gravity, so to speak, of agricultural residues that might be used for a district heating system or liquid fuel production. And we're able to develop supply cost curves for that biomass resource relative to York region, right? And so we're able to do a whole lot with this information. In particular, start to think about the options and opportunities that are available and design policies and programs around that. So what we've done, the resource that we provide here, is a guidebook that is written for, a technical audience. In other words, a municipal GIS team will be able to take this this framework that we've provided, as well as guidance on the particular methods and tools to be used to generate these maps for you. So the way that we've written up the guidebook is such that really anybody with a fourth year, with experience in a fourth year or upper year undergraduate course in GIS could follow along, and assuming data availability, which municipalities have in most cases, will be able to produce these kinds of maps. And of course, alternatively, if your GIS team does not have that capacity, then you can use the guidebook as a focal point to talk, to search out partnerships with consultants who can help you map this stuff. So it's important to acknowledge that the maps that would be generated out of the workflows that we provide are not answers per se. So they shouldn't necessarily be used to make investment decisions or to make permitting decisions. That, as you can probably understand, is a whole other layer of analysis and expertise that would be required for that. They're meant to develop plans, and they're meant to invoke key policy conversations in particular. And I'll come back to what those conversations could look like. But I first want to discuss the next action item, and that is to undertake broad community and stakeholder engagement to raise awareness and address concerns related to those opportunities. I've heard me say this before, if you've listened to a previous webinar, that a lot of the concerns related to renewable energy developments, whether it be objections to wind turbines or objections to solar panels, are objections, yes, to the changes in landscape that occur and to their ideas about how much these systems cost, but they are also objections to the decision-making process. In other words, a more participatory, inclusive decision-making process is more likely to lead to stronger acceptance across the community, and is also more likely to lead to shared opportunities and collaborative implementation, as we'll talk about in a minute. And so the action item is to undertake community and stakeholder engagement broadly. I think that's all intuitive to us, but specifically we provide a set of resources to help you with designing engagement exercises that are based on participatory mapping. And the reason that we do this and the reason that we think it is so important is because a lot of the problems and the opportunities related to renewable energy development are spatial in nature. And it's really hard to have meaningful conversations with the general public or with key stakeholders or possible implementation partners unless you are talking about the particular places in the landscapes that are meaningful to people. And so the maps that can be produced out of the workflows in the previous action item, we feel are crucial assets in driving effective community and stakeholder engagement. So we're just showing you graphics on the right here of what this has looked like for us in our participating communities. So this is Rebecca Yons. Shout out to the fabulous Rebecca Yons, who spent a lot of time in these communities, working with the general public at libraries and community centers, bringing these maps to the community and having really vibrant conversations. In addition to that sort of broad public engagement, we've also done more targeted stakeholder engagement, right, where we hold focus groups that include representatives of key interest groups within the community and talk about specific issues like habitat, impacts on habitat and or impacts on agricultural land. Right, so the maps and the engagement should be used for broad public engagement to raise awareness as well as targeted engagement to dig into key policy issues. More recently, we've had to, of course, in this COVID environment, we've had to flip to an online delivery, and we have done that. So what you're seeing here is an online map of solar potential in this particular community. And what we've done is provided a platform for individuals to go into this map, draw their own polygon or drop their own point, and let us know whether or not this area is acceptable, unacceptable, or would be acceptable for particular conditions from their perspective. They're allowed to tell us, they're given a space to tell us and elaborate more on why they would or would not want to see, in this case, a solar farm built on this particular plot of land. So again, revolving the conversation around a map, around an actual landscape that is going to have to change in order to facilitate renewable energy development helps to invoke really powerful conversations, and which will eventually bring us to our next action item here around land use plans and land use planning constraints on renewable energy development. So I want to enter into that conversation with an anecdote and some experiences that we've had working with the region of Waterloo. So what I'm showing here is a map on the right is the accessible solar resources in the region of Waterloo. These are resources that would be deemed technically accessible and legally accessible if we assumed that all agricultural land was open for and would be considered for solar energy development. So as you can see, it's basically a map of agricultural land in the region, subject to some constraints, right? So we've removed any of the key environmentally sensitive areas from this map and have really left only agricultural land that is large enough to support a utility scale ground mount PV system in the Waterloo region. So this is what the map would look like and what the potential would look like if you included all agricultural land. There's something like 8,000 to 10,000 megawatts of potential installed capacity here, you know, if we covered all of this land, which we wouldn't do, but that gives you a sense of the capacity ceiling, right, of the opportunity that would be available. We can rerun this map under very different scenarios and under very different policy assumptions. So now what we're showing you is a map of areas that would be accessible for PV development if we only allowed PV development on subprime agricultural land. And as you may recall, these were the conditions under which solar development was allowed on agricultural land under the Green Energy and Green Economy Act in Ontario, where prime agricultural land was prohibited. So this is what that map would look like if the region decided to stick with that policy and say we are only going to allow PV development on subprime agricultural land. This is what the opportunity looks like. So it drops down to about 2,000 megawatts of capacity that might be available. And if in this map, the region has a lot of the agricultural land in the south east of this map here is considered protected. So they consider it protected countryside. So we wanted to know if we eliminated that land and, in other words, restricted PV development to only subprime agricultural land, not including any protected countryside, this is what the map looks like. So now we're left with about 800 megawatts of potential installed capacity. So I walked through that example not to discuss the merits of whether or not we should allow PV on agricultural land. That's not for me to decide, and I don't think that's what we want to discuss today. I use that as an example of entering into this third action item, which is to audit land use regulations to identify barriers to renewable energy development and to undertake reforms that manage renewable energy development in the public interest. Is one of the key questions that those maps can invoke are conversations about how we want to treat agricultural land relative to renewable energy development. What would it look like if we were more or less restrictive, right? Those maps can really help you do that. And in addition to that, we need to think about the ways in which our land use regulations are currently managing renewable energy implementation in very subtle ways, in ways that might not be immediately obvious. And so the idea here is to develop a land use plans and land use regulatory controls on development that can, on one hand, proactively address some of the concerns that people might have about impacts on habitat and impacts on renewable energy development. And on the other hand, also provide clarity for developers around the conditions under which a project will be granted a permit by the local municipality relative to its interest in protecting agricultural land and habitat in environmentally sensitive areas. And so the primary site for expressing these kinds of policy initiatives relative to renewable energy is in what are called official plans in Ontario or master development plans in Alberta. And so one of the other resources that we provided is a databases that give you verbatim examples of the ways in which renewable energy in all its forms, district energy, renewable district energy and solar and wind have been incorporated into official plans or master development plans in each of the 3 provinces in which we were working. And so by the time that this is released, we will have full coverage of New Brunswick. We will have complete coverage of single tier and upper tier municipalities in Ontario, and we will have full coverage in Alberta. And the data that or the resource that we provide are databases that many of you would have already seen. So here I'm showing you what the database looks like for the province of Ontario. So again, categorized into single tier municipalities and upper tier municipalities. So you know, the website will provide some key exemplars and some takeaways to help you think through what the next steps might be in incorporating renewable energy into official plans. But what this resource allows you to do is to do your own targeted queries based on the needs that are available to you. So I recently had a municipal practitioner approach me and say, I want to understand how other municipalities have incorporated district energy into their official plans and some language around that. Can you share with me any examples? Well, what we can do is share this database, or once it's up online, you can go to this database, access the spreadsheet, and run your own search queries. Right? So simple as running a Control F, look for district energy, and you'll be taken to those verbatim examples in municipalities across Ontario. Now, not all municipalities have done this, and so where those municipalities have an official plan, of course, but they don't have any mention of renewable energy, then they'll appear as blank. But in other cases, we've got all of the verbatim examples. So we have a spreadsheet like this for New Brunswick, for all of New Brunswick, and we will have a spreadsheet like this for all of Alberta by the time this resource goes live online. Okay, back to the presentation. So the 5th piece that we provide resources around is approaches to developing collaborative implementation practices. And so this aligns with the webinar that we held a couple of weeks ago now, in which Alex Chapman and I discussed and described the experience of AIRE Energy Guelph, a not-for-profit that is an intermediary that is trying to catalyze the implementation of renewable energy development in the city of Guelph, and importantly, to convert capacity holders into implementation partners, right? Those utility, for example, large landholders or real estate companies in the region or the city, try to bring those capacity holders together and convert them into implementation partners, helping to identify shared opportunities. And what this does is it shifts the municipal thinking from an inside-out approach, where the municipality aims to get internally aligned and then work with partners, into an outside-in approach. In other words, you start with the idea of a partnership and you organize yourselves internally in relation to the objectives and the initiatives that have been identified through the partnership or through the intermediary. There are a few possible approaches, and apologies, these are all from Ontario, so this will show my Ontario bias here. But these 3 approaches describe very different governance frameworks through which to institutionalize these collaborative implementation pathways. So AIRE Energy Guelph is a not-for-profit that has been established and recognized by the City of Guelph and is working under a service agreement with the City of Guelph. Waterloo Region Community Energy, unlike AIRE Energy Guelph, is not incorporated, is of course guided by a strategic plan, but is not incorporated, does not have a board of directors. And another example would be Markham District Energy, which is a corporation that has been set up by the city of the town of Markham in order to find opportunities to implement district energy. So there's 3 very different designs, and no doubt a lot more work needs to be done in order to understand the implications of these different models, these governance frameworks. But what we've done, and the resources that we will be sharing with you, are a SWOT analysis of the idea of intermediaries in general. Intermediaries being organizations that in which the municipality is a primary partner. organizations that are tasked with a mandate to work across sectors, work across institutions, try to break down those barriers and try to work from outside in rather than inside out. That's the general concept of an intermediary. And what we've done is identified, based on a literature review, based on some interviews with individuals who have some practical experience with these intermediaries, laid out some of the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats associated with this so that you can think about whether or not the idea of an intermediary is right for your community, given where you're at. And also, once you've made that decision about whether or not it's appropriate, what governance framework are you interested in pursuing? Whether it be a structured not-for-profit, a less structured partnership like Waterloo Region Community Energy, or a business entity like Markham District Energy. There are a few different models and a few different design considerations. Okay, so that's it at a high level. Those are the resources, some examples of the resources that will be made available to you to help you answer this question: what can municipalities do to accelerate implementation of renewable energy? And again, just to echo a couple of things that we started with, one is a huge thank you to everybody who has been instrumental in pulling this together. All the folks that were mentioned on that first slide is our community partners. And the second is that we hope that this serves as sort of a clearinghouse or a warehouse that will, in other words, a focal point that will help accelerate the diffusion of ideas and accelerate the diffusion of policies, governance models, through which to accelerate implementation. So apologies because it doesn't provide any specific answers to that question necessarily. It doesn't give you a playbook that said, here, just do this and you'll be okay. But I think we all understand the value in providing the recipe rather than specifying the ingredients. What we're doing is we've provided a recipe here in the graphic on the right, and some options for ingredients that you can use in the development of your own pathway that is fit for your community. So I'll leave this hanging for now, if that's okay, so that we've all got the big picture in our mind, and open it up for any questions that you might have.
Excellent. Thank you, Kirby. That's a very, very good overview and very in-depth of all the key pieces that are coming as a part of this protocol. And as Kirby mentioned, we are looking to release this early in the new year, so this will go public, and we will be sure to share it with everyone who is here on the call today. If anyone has any questions or wants any more information, please, I'll direct you towards the chat box or the Q&A box, either one, and enter it there. We do have a couple questions rolling in already. So the first one is around how snow cover affects the efficiency of solar energy systems on agricultural land. Kirby, would you be able to speak to that?
Yeah, so it's of course site specific, the answer to that question. I mean, it depends on solar angle, and it depends on local topology and all sorts of things, topography. But in general, the reflection from the snow has been shown to increase, assuming the panels themselves aren't covered by snow, assuming that the snow has been cleared, because PV systems can make use of diffuse light as well as direct sunlight. Snow can actually be a good thing, but the panels need to be cleared, of course, and how much of a good thing will depend on site characteristics, but it's not a barrier.
Absolutely, that's a great point. And I'll also add that the angle of installation as well has a lot to do with how long the snow stays if you aren't actively clearing it as well. Perfect, thank you, Kirby. Another question is with the provincial databases, if these will be available on the Quest website under the resource section and what the date of that will be. So as I mentioned, we are in the process of releasing all of this, and early in the new year, first couple weeks of January, it will be available. This will be on a AIRE landing page. So the graphic you're seeing there, they will all be connected and available through the landing page. And
And
we will be. Oh, go ahead, Kirby.
sorry, I was just going to add that if you wanted the resources now, please do reach out. So I've got full coverage of New Brunswick. I've got full coverage of upper tier municipalities in Ontario, and almost complete coverage of single tier, municipalities in Ontario. And I have a handful from Alberta, but that handful will turn into complete coverage over the next week or so. So please feel free to reach out, and I can send you over the raw spreadsheet in advance.
Yes, absolutely. But all of the collection of everything that we, Kirby has spoken to today will be available and will be shared publicly via the Quest website and through our various newsletters and social media as well. So it'll be made available that way. Is there any other questions or comments or anything regarding the presentation today? And while we wait for any last final questions, I will say that all the recording from today's webinar, along with the 3 previous parts, will be available on the webinar landing page on the Quest website following today's presentation. And they will be able to be viewed and shared to those who potentially were unable to attend any of the previous sessions. As Kirby mentioned, if there are any other questions that come up after the fact, definitely feel free to submit them to Kirby and myself, and we do have a couple further ones coming in. Providing database information for other provinces, specifically in the case of British Columbia, but there are also other jurisdictions for which this applies. I mean, I can provide a bit of an answer there, and then I'll throw to you, Kirby, as well. Ideally, we would love to populate it with every single jurisdiction in Canada if possible. This is very much a starting point, and the current jurisdictions that we have is based on participation in within the scope of the project. And Kirby, I'll throw to you if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, just that we now have a methodology and a framework through which to collect these data and organize these data. So it would be, it wouldn't take a lot, and we could certainly gather similar data for all jurisdictions. It's a matter of capacity, frankly. And I think, yeah, we're hoping to raise some funds to expand it. And I'll just also flag some academic research that is making use of these data that may also, I can't promise anything because I don't know what the funding situation will be for the next little while, but we're hoping to expand it through some academic research as well.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the more information we have, the more powerful a collection of resources this is. Thank you. So moving on to our next question, what is the main challenge from the municipalities that we found? Challenges from the municipalities that we have found, is there some similarities throughout, and what would they be?
That's tough. Every community is different, right? But I would say if I had to find a common thread, it would be twofold. One is encouraging staff. So when I say staff, I don't necessarily mean the folks on this call, because I think a lot of the sustainability professionals working with and in municipalities get this, but other staff in municipalities don't always see their role in implementing renewable energy. They don't see a role for themselves, and if they do see a role for themselves, they assume it's on the corporate side, strictly speaking, right? That, well, we could put solar panels on the roofs of our buildings, or we could capture biogas from our wastewater facility. That's sort of the extent of their thinking. And again, I don't want to trivialize that. That is crucial for the municipality to think of themselves as implementers as well. But it's a much harder conversation. We're still learning the language, and we're still learning exactly who to talk to and how to phrase it and frame it. It's a much harder conversation to get the municipality to think about its role in facilitating more broadly renewable energy development. And that, which brings me to my second common thread, and that is around land use planning. Generally speaking, land use planners proper are still learning their role in energy planning. And the subtle but really important controls that land use plans and land use regulations play in deciding whether or not renewable energy is going to be viable. They're still learning that. And on the other side of things, energy planners and sustainability practitioners who aren't planners, strictly speaking, who aren't land use planners, especially, strictly speaking, are having a difficult time using the right language and communicating in the right way. So I think that that's a challenge that we're, I mean, I'm excited to report that we're making better progress and everybody is starting to get on the same page, and the development of these intermediaries organizations is also driving that. Because the success, especially of district energy, but even for other land-based energy systems like solar, wind, biomass, their success really depends on integrating energy planning with urban planning, land use, and rural land use planning very tightly. And when you develop an intermediary organization, like a Markham District Energy, or like an AIRE Energy Guelph, or like a Waterloo Community Energy, when you develop those intermediaries, what you're doing is you're institutionalizing, you're providing a structure in which to bring those conversations and those communities together. So I think we're starting to see that unfold, but nonetheless, that piece continues to be a challenge. And then of course, the usual caveat. Municipalities are asked to do more with less. Governments broadly are asked to do more with less, particularly in a COVID environment. And so this is one of the reasons why we've developed the protocol in this way, is to also identify some of the low-hanging fruit and some of the less resource-intensive ways in which municipalities can facilitate. We don't want to draw attention away from the more resource-intensive ways, like implementation and investment. So we don't want to say, ignore these things and focus on facilitation. But by providing this menu, providing this protocol in the way that we have, we hope that we've identified opportunities that and initiatives that municipalities can take on tomorrow in relatively low resource, with relatively low resources to move the needle even just a little bit.
Absolutely. That's an excellent answer. Thank you very much. So our next question is around the New Brunswick Municipalities Act and how it can be changed to allow PACE programs, as that exists as a current barrier to renewable energy. And just curious if there's any thoughts around that, Kirby.
Yeah, well, the first is that local improvement charges or PACE programs, property assessed clean energy programs, are one of the case studies that we will share in the resources. So you'll get some resources to think through this. I'm not familiar enough with the New Brunswick Municipalities Act to answer that question specifically. So what I'll do is two things. One is answer in a roundabout way based on my understanding of others, and two, point you to people who could answer that question much better. The roundabout way is to through our experience with the Ontario legislation. The Ontario legislation opens up and enables LICs to be used for energy efficiency retrofits. But our experience, and I'm speaking, when I say our, I mean AIRE Energy Guelph. So I've got my hat on, AIRE Energy Guelph hat on, is that it tends to be very prescriptive in terms of the role that the municipality will play. And the realization that we've come to is that there needs to be, municipalities need options to play as either as a direct role as they want to build and implement the whole PACE program or LIC program, or a very indirect role. In other words, doing only what the municipality can do and has to do. That is, place the lien on the property and work with the tax roll, right? So there are, in an ideal scenario, a municipality could be given the choice to play as much or as little a role as possible, but absolutely a role without their involvement. There is no PACE program, and that gets to the heart of the question. And I think the best folks to talk to that come to my mind are the folks at PACE Atlantic. They're a group that we're working with, Julian Boyle in particular, a group that we're working with to design our program here in Guelph. And related to that, I would also encourage you to reach out to Alex Chapman at AIRE Energy Guelph. I know he sits on the board of PACE Canada, and so they've got a view of the different provincial contexts. But unfortunately, I don't know enough about. I'd be guessing, and I would hate to guess with incomplete information. So hopefully, those other folks can help you get to the weeds on that.
Absolutely, that's great information. Thank you so much. Our final question here is around expanding the tool to cover, Aboriginal, Indigenous lands as well as treaty lands, tribal lands, and however that is to be applied across the country. In terms of where settlements exist, or they're quasi-municipal in terms of power and responsibilities. How could that be integrated into the tool, and would that be something that is planned in the future? Kirby, would you be able to speak to that as well?
Yes, so it's a fantastic question. And my short answer is that I wouldn't want to integrate it into the tool. It would need another tool or another toolkit in my mind. The framework that we've used and the lens that we've applied is very much a municipal lens. And by that I mean, I don't just mean local, I mean municipal in terms of the administrative functions it serves and the authorities that it is granted by the provincial government, the politics and policies related to what it means to be a municipality. It is related to ideas about property and land values that are very Eurocentric or westernized settler society ideas of land and property. And so we acknowledge all of that. And it would be inappropriate to take this. I'm not suggesting that this is what the person asking the question is suggesting. I just wanted to be clear that it would be inappropriate to sort of take that lens, that perspective, and modify it for development and implementation in an Indigenous or First Nations context. I think what we need to do is stick with the idea of multiple pieces that need to come together in order to implement something, but really let those pieces emerge from the ground up. We have talked about bringing this, in particular, our participatory mapping exercises into Indigenous communities and into First Nations, as well as our energy mapping exercises into those communities. And even just thinking through that has led to very important lessons, right? Like, because as soon as you develop a map and you call a particular place region of such and such or city of such and such, right off the bat, you are making a statement about sovereignty and claims to land and territoriality that might be inconsistent with those Indigenous communities and Indigenous people. So it involves a whole different way of thinking about land, landscapes, sovereignty, ownership, property, all sorts of things. So all that is to say, if we have thought through how we would do this, but we haven't thought so carefully as to get to a point where we could just easily transpose this, mostly because I don't think it's that easy. The very short answer is would love to find partners who could help us with that, because I do think that it would be applying some of these ideas, modifying some of these ideas, but more importantly, developing ground up, Indigenous-led protocol would be quite exciting.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And so that does it for our questions and for our time here today. So I do again want to thank Kirby for the wonderful presentation today. Very, very informative, lots of good information there. And for all the work on the project overall. I think this is going to be a very useful collection of resources and a very useful guide in terms of implementing renewable energy. And I would encourage everybody on the call today to look for the public release of all of this good stuff early in the new year. And so that does it for our national webinar series. So thank you to everybody who attended. There's been lots of good information shared throughout. And as I mentioned earlier, all the recordings will be available on the landing page following today's presentation. So I hope everybody has a wonderful day, a wonderful rest of the week. And as we get into the holiday season, I hope everybody has a good, relaxing holiday and manages to stay safe. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Eric, for being our fearless leader and organizing us through all of this.
Do what I can. Thank you very much, everybody.
Bye, everybody.